In this video, I want to explore the various options that we have available to us when creating XY scatter plots. So the scenario in our learning activity is that we have data that is representative of the sales figures from a monthly standpoint in the years of 2008 to 2010. The objective of this learning activity is that we'll create the XY scatter. We'll also explore various trends and explore the options of the trend lines that we add on to our plots. So let's go ahead and open up our learning activity file. So once you open up the file that we have for this learning activity, we have month and the sales numbers that we have for that given month. We do see that month is our title, though we have extra information here. It's because of the way the data was originally added to the data set. So by default, if you say January 2008, it'll by default put the first of the month and actually recognize the day that occurred on. What I would actually recommend is exploring the various dates, and this is a little bit beyond the scope of XY scatter, but it's a useful feature nevertheless. So let's actually change the format. So let's highlight our dates. And we could actually change this here with a short date or of course the long, which it was already. But what I want to do, or what I want to show you, is to go into the number format. So under number, there's this little button here that we can hit that'll bring up much more options than what is in the drop down. So once we select date, it'll kind of highlight which one you have selected. So it could be a situation where we might want to try several of these already generated date formats to select one that we are comfortable with. For example, let's select this one here. 1-1. Well, that's not necessarily descriptive enough for me. Let's go back. Maybe I want some information that displays maybe the month and perhaps the year. So it's already given us a little sample here, January of 08. Let's go ahead and hit that. Me particular, I like this format. You may not, or you may agree with me that this is a nice format. Regardless, there are several that we have available to us. Rather than the abbreviation, maybe you would like to actually display the entire month name. We can do that, August 2008. Let's see, we could actually go forward here and only display the month, or, again, several options. I'm going to leave it on this option of March and then the year. So let's go ahead and hit that. Now, to create our XY scatter, the easiest way to do this is to realize that if you format your data, your spreadsheet, where your column, your leftmost column that you select is the X, and the rightmost column in a two-dimensional situation here is in the right, Excel actually will guess or has already determined the layout of the chart, meaning that if we select the XY column, and this truly is the X, month is truly the X, and sales is truly the Y, what we can do is go to Insert, XY Scatter, and for now I'm just going to create a XY scatter with just the dots, the markers if you will. Just to show you the example here that our graph is pretty much created for us only because month and sales were in the A-B column respectively. We could create this manually, and I definitely want to do that. So let's go to a cell that does not have any data. And by the way, this is the reason why I always go to a cell without data. If you select the 19,800 and cell B2 and go to Insert, Scatter, and I'll just pick the first one, it actually does the same exact thing that we did when we highlighted all the values in column A and B. So regardless of where you're at, if you select a cell here with information in it and go to insert, scatter, it'll guess. Excel will guess what type of format your data is in, and it's accounted for the situation where the leftmost column is your X and preceding columns are your Y. But regardless, let's go ahead and through the steps here of creating the graph. Let's go to Insert, Scatter, and we will do one with only markers. So I have a blank canvas. I can right click on that canvas, go to Select Data. I want to add a series, so let's go to the Add button. The series name, let's just call it, we'll call it Sales, I guess. The X values will be all the dates. The series Y, by default you have this 1 here. We want to get rid of that and actually highlight all the values. So from B2 to B31 and hit OK. The horizontal is taken care of, so let's hit OK. We do see some information here that's a little hard to read. Going back to the format of this particular set of information, what we could actually do is go back to that abbreviated form. That's actually going to help us a little bit, and I'm only doing that to show you that the values here that you're seeing are related to your text. So let's go back in and use the abbreviated form, March 01, in this case 08 through 10. Okay, so now we have the data in a little bit better fashion where we have our axis labels in a little bit better presentation form. Okay, so now what can we do? Well, we can go to Chart Tools and we can sort of play around with different designs. I typically use this first one because I want an axis label, which would be sales, and I want an x-axis label, which will be, in this case, I'm going to reference month. I'm not actually too happy with the word month. We could call it month and time, or year, I should say, or we could just simply say time. So whatever, if we link this to the time cell, whatever we change here in A1 will change here in the graph. So let's go ahead and, rather than time, let's say date. Okay, so that gets changed automatically. The title, maybe I'm not so happy with either. I don't necessarily want to just say sales. Let's say monthly sales. And that should do it. Other options that we can explore. We do have our data ranging in this automatic chart option here from 0 and increments of 5,000. Maybe actually we would like to take off all of these zeros, these trailing zeros here. I just want to show you a few features what we can do. We can right click on this axis and go to Format the Axis. And what we can actually select is, I'm going to leave this on automatic. We can actually control if we wanted to minimums, maximums, and whatnot. But the option I want to feature here is the display units. And I'm going to display in terms of thousands. So what this is going to do for us is actually put this word thousands on our scale and take off all of those zeros that we were showing before. So it's kind of useful, especially if you're dealing with numbers in the millions and whatnot. Okay, so we have our graph so far. It does look like we have an XY scatter, just like we asked for. I would argue that there's a better way to display this. Since we have our data in ascending order according to date, I would recommend actually changing this chart type rather than one with markers to ones with connected lines. So let's actually go into our chart tools and go to design. And if we go all the way over here to chart type, we can change this. The first one we have here is smooth lines. Well, the first one after our default here. The next one we have, the third option, is scatter with smooth lines, no markers. The next one we have is scatter with straight lines and markers. This is the one I was referring to. And then we have the straight lines without markers. So I want to actually choose this one because I think it's the most reasonable chart to select for this situation. Okay, so we have our figure here. Let's work on actually creating a trend line for this graph. We can right click on any point on the chart and go to add trend line, or if you want to, we can actually go to layout trend line, and we can select from the available options here, linear, exponential, linear, forecast, and so forth, or we could go down to the more. This is actually the same dialog window that would be displayed if you right clicked on a single point. So just to demonstrate that, let me close this window, and I'm going to undo my step because it did in fact put that linear series here, and I don't want it. So I'm going to undo with Control Z, and I'm going to click on one of the markers. I'm going to right click on one of the markers and go to add trend line, and it's the same exact window. Okay, so by default, it's wanting to put a linear trend line. That's definitely the most commonly used. We do have others which I want to explore. So one might look at this data and say, you know, there's more going on here than just a linear trend line. And maybe I should make that a little bit more visible by moving around this legend. I'm going to actually reduce the size of it. And it's a little bit tricky at first to kind of grab a hold of some of these objects in the chart itself. But I'm going to put this centered down here, the legend, and expand the actual graph size that we're dealing with, and try to straighten some of this up. So I think that looks okay. So anyway, what I was referring to is that there is a little bit more going on here, one might argue, than just a simple linear trend. Let me show you how to edit this trend line. Maybe this is more exponential, or maybe moving average or something else like that is needed in this situation. What you can actually do is click on the trend line, and you'll notice that there's two sort of markers to edit this trend line. So it takes some patience, I guess you would say, to click on it, right click, and go to Format Trend Line. Once we do, we have the options for this trend line that we can edit. We could imply an exponential trend, go back to linear, and you can see in the background these are changing, albeit very subtle. Polynomial trend, it seems like it's a very good fit to the actual trend. Perhaps there was some sort of down period or a reason that we can explain why sales dipped between, let's say, June of 08 to around July 09. We could change this to a power, perhaps a moving average. For now, I'm actually going to leave this on a polynomial. And I would suggest that this isn't necessarily a tutorial on forecasting and things like that, but you have to be careful when you add polynomials, and this is the reason why. Let me first add the equation and display the R-square, and I don't want to get too far off scope, but I'm going to display the equation and display the R-square, and the higher the R-square value is, let's just say in general, the more variation is explained by the model, which I mean the distance between this line and these points, the more is explained with this model. So if that's a little confusing, don't necessarily worry about it. I'm simply going to fill this in with a white background, and actually the outline is going to be black and the shape fill will be white, just to separate that out. What I was referring to is if you right click on the trend line and sort of cycle through the available options, we have an exponential 0.04. That's a low value of an R squared. Linear is not much different. Logarithmic is about the same. Polynomial is the best that we have available. Power and moving, actually one won't be generated for moving average, but for the polynomial, we can actually increase the size of our polynomial fit, and you can see that the R squared is getting better, but I would argue that keeping it very simple is a better modeling practice. And that's all I want to say about that for now. This video is more about how to manipulate the graphs and things like that. So one thing I would like to perhaps visualize on my graph is a forecast, and I am going to suggest that we want to look 24 months into the future. And what that actually is going to do once I move away from this cell here, this focus, is that it's going to extend this line upwards. So let's go ahead and see that. And it's very subtle, but it did in fact move that to the right. Let's hit close for now and just review what we have. We have a polynomial fit, we have our series, we have our legend here. If you'd like to put a box around that, we could actually apply that. We could add things like grid lines. I was looking for a vertical, and I would like just the major and minor here. So that to me looks a little bit better. What we can actually do is make this trend line a little bit more visible. Right now to me it's a little hidden. I'm going to right click on that again and go to Format Trend Line, and actually we can change the color. It's automatically defaulted. We can control that by saying a solid color. Maybe we want red. Okay, so now we have changed that to red. We have a line style. Perhaps this 0.75 font is not big enough. So let's crank it up to about 3. I can definitely see that now. We can add a dash type. Perhaps we want this line dash style. Or if we want to change it to this dotted style, we can. So there's many different options we can explore with. The arrow settings is kind of a neat feature. We have a beginning type and an end type. I actually sometimes utilize the arrow to show a direction. If that arrow is not big enough, we can actually control the size here by making it smaller or larger. So I think that one's okay. Perhaps this one is a little bit better. Let's see, what else can we do? The other thing that you might want to do, and again, this is just an example to show you the various features that you have in your control. Maybe we're done with editing this trend line. Maybe we want to go back to editing this series. So I'm actually going to click it, and when you do, this series option comes available. And it could be that we're not happy with the blue line, blue marker. Maybe we want to make our markers actually yellow. So marker options. First, we can choose the shape, which is defaulted as this diamond. Perhaps we want to use a built-in. Maybe we want to use X's instead, or maybe squares, or maybe sort of a line style here. So anyway, the idea is that we have many to choose from. We can actually select a picture if we wanted to. I'm going to select this one, which is kind of like a crosshair, I guess. Let me just select this one here. And I'm going to change the marker fill to a solid fill that's no longer blue, but perhaps yellow. Okay, so what we're seeing is the line connecting these is still blue. The marker color is actually filled in with the yellow. And maybe I'm not liking this crosshair thing. I'm going to make it back to a square. I think that looks a little bit better. As far as the line color, it's automatically defined. Perhaps we want to change that from blue to a solid fill of black. So we can change that from blue. So many different things that we can do here. The style, similarly to our trend line, we can actually make the connecting line smaller. We can make it larger. We can make different line styles. We can have dash types and whatnot. We could put arrows on it if we really wanted to. We can actually smooth the lines here if we wanted to. And then we can control various things with the markers again. The marker color, the style, how thick the marker is, if you will. And maybe I'll just demonstrate that by cranking this up to 1.5. Shadows and other techniques which aren't necessarily used a lot, or at least I don't, but there's several things to play around with. So I'm going to close this here and kind of work on some of the things. I don't like how this date is down at the bottom, so I'm going to raise that up just a little bit. I'm going to extend this over to the right and move this equation into the chart a little bit so it's encompassing in the chart itself. So with that said, I just want to take a few seconds to review. We did have a date and a sales figure. The date was entered in as month and year, and we wanted to create an XY scatter. We reviewed the various trend lines that we had after we created the XY scatter, and we spent some time creating or changing the options that we had. For example, we changed the blue or the black trend line for the line itself from black to red. We've put a dash, we have the arrow, and then we changed the marker style to a yellow. One with a keen eye might actually notice that the box around this marker here is actually still blue, and let me fix that. We can go right click, format data series, marker line color. Should not be solid in my opinion. It should be a solid fill, and let's make it black. So anyway, we went ahead and changed some of these options with our graph, and now we have a graph that is a little bit more lively in terms of color, and it's all controlled by the user, of course, to your personal preference.